Good evening, and welcome to Truth Report. I'm Alex Truth. Tonight, we're tracking two stories that might seem worlds apart, but share a deeply troubling common thread. From Hong Kong to the United Kingdom, we're watching democratic institutions bend, break, and in some cases, fight back in ways nobody expected.
I'm Maya Clarity, and I have to say, Alex, when you lay these stories side by side, the picture that emerges is striking. In one corner of the world, a 68-year-old retiree is sitting behind bars for posting his political opinions on Facebook. In another, voters are delivering a thundering rebuke to a government they feel has abandoned its principles. The question we're asking tonight is simple. What happens when ordinary people feel their voices are being silenced?
And what happens when they find new ways to make those voices heard? We're going to dig deep into both of these stories, name names, trace the power structures, and connect the dots that the mainstream coverage is missing. So stay with us. This is Truth Report, and we don't do surface level.
Let's start where the stakes are highest. Alex, take us to Hong Kong.
Alright, let's get into it. A Hong Kong court has just sentenced a retiree named Lam Ming-chung to 8 months in prison. 8 months behind bars. His crime? Posting speeches on his personal Facebook account in which he criticized Hong Kong authorities and called on voters to boycott the Legislative Council election held last year. He's 68 years old, a retiree, and he is now a convicted criminal under Hong Kong's domestic national security law.
Let's be precise about what happened here, because the details matter. According to the South China Morning Post, Lam admitted on Friday to posting what prosecutors described as seditious content on his Facebook account between September 2024 and November of last year. The charge was that he spread hatred against authorities. Think about that phrase for a moment. Spreading hatred against authorities. In most functioning democracies, that's called political speech. It's called dissent. It's called the basic currency of a free society.
And that's exactly the point. This prosecution didn't happen under some dusty colonial-era statute pulled off a shelf. This happened under the domestic national security law, which was enacted in the wake of the Beijing-imposed national security legislation that transformed Hong Kong's legal landscape starting in 2020. What we are witnessing is the systematic application of these laws not against armed militants, not against foreign agents, but against a retired man with a Facebook account and political opinions.
Let's put this in context, because Hong Kong didn't arrive here overnight. After the massive pro-democracy protests of 2019, Beijing imposed the national security law in June 2020, bypassing Hong Kong's own legislature entirely. That law criminalized secession, subversion, terrorism, and collusion with foreign forces, with maximum penalties of life imprisonment. Then in 2024, Hong Kong's own government passed a complementary domestic security law, Article 23, which had been shelved for 2 decades because of public opposition. That law expanded the toolkit even further, adding offenses like sedition, treason, and external interference.
And here's what's critical to understand. The sedition provisions being used against Lam Ming-chung are extraordinarily broad. Sedition under these laws can include anything that brings into hatred or contempt, or excites disaffection against the government. Those are not my words. That is the legal standard. And under that standard, virtually any criticism of the government, any call to boycott an election, any expression of deep dissatisfaction can be reframed as a criminal act. This isn't a law designed to protect public safety. This is a law designed to protect the government from its own people.
And the chilling effect is exactly the point, Alex. When you jail a 68-year-old retiree for Facebook posts, the message isn't really directed at him. He's not a threat. The message is directed at every single person in Hong Kong who might think about posting something critical, who might consider speaking out, who might wonder whether it's safe to share their political views online. The answer the government is delivering, loudly and clearly, is no. It is not safe. You will be found. You will be charged. You will go to prison.
Let's talk about the election boycott aspect specifically, because that adds another layer. Lam reportedly called on voters to boycott the Legislative Council election. Now, in Hong Kong's current political system, the legislature has been restructured so that only a small fraction of seats are directly elected by the public. Most are chosen by a largely pro-Beijing election committee. Critics have called it a rubber stamp body. So when someone calls for a boycott of that election, they're not undermining democracy. They're protesting the absence of it. And for that protest, expressed through words on a social media platform, this man has lost his freedom.
The prosecution's framing is also worth examining closely. They said he spread hatred against authorities. But hatred against authorities is not the same as incitement to violence. It's not the same as plotting an attack. It's not the same as espionage. A retiree expressing anger at his government on Facebook is engaging in one of the most fundamental forms of political participation. Every democracy in the world protects that right, not because it's comfortable for those in power, but because a government that cannot withstand criticism from its own citizens is a government that has lost its legitimacy.
And we need to talk about the pattern here, Maya, because Lam Ming-chung is not an isolated case. Since the national security law was imposed, Hong Kong has prosecuted journalists, activists, former legislators, academics, trade unionists, and now ordinary retirees. The pro-democracy newspaper Apple Daily was forced to close. Its founder, Jimmy Lai, has been imprisoned and faces trial under the national security law. Dozens of pro-democracy politicians were arrested in mass prosecutions. Civil society organizations have disbanded. The Hong Kong that existed as a vibrant, outspoken, politically engaged city is being methodically dismantled, case by case, prosecution by prosecution.
And the international response has been, frankly, inadequate. Western governments issue statements of concern. They express disappointment. But the economic ties, the financial relationships, the desire to maintain access to Chinese markets, all of that tempers any real action. Hong Kong remains a major global financial center. International banks, law firms, and corporations continue to operate there. The uncomfortable truth is that the world has largely decided that Hong Kong's freedoms are an acceptable price to pay for continued business as usual.
Who benefits from this prosecution? Beijing benefits, because every successful sedition case reinforces the message that the national security framework works as intended, that dissent can be identified, prosecuted, and punished efficiently. The Hong Kong government benefits, because it demonstrates loyalty to Beijing and shows that the domestic security law they fought so hard to pass is being actively used. And who loses? Lam Ming-chung loses 8 months of his life at age 68. But beyond him, every person in Hong Kong who values free expression loses. Every journalist who considers covering a sensitive story loses. Every citizen who thinks twice before posting online loses. The loss is collective, and it is by design.
There's also a technological dimension here that deserves attention. This case involves monitoring of social media posts. Someone, whether an algorithm, a government monitor, or an informant, flagged this retiree's Facebook activity and reported it to authorities. That means the surveillance infrastructure is actively watching ordinary citizens' social media. This isn't intelligence gathering against a foreign threat. This is domestic surveillance of political speech by elderly citizens. The apparatus that was sold to the public as necessary for national security is being used to police the Facebook posts of retirees.
And that surveillance architecture, once built, never gets smaller. It only expands. The tools developed to monitor seditious Facebook posts today will be used to monitor private messaging apps tomorrow, workplace communications the day after that. This is the trajectory of every authoritarian surveillance state in history. You start with the most visible dissidents, the protest leaders, the newspaper editors. Then you move to the politicians and the academics. Then you come for the ordinary people, the retirees, the students, the workers. Lam Ming-chung is not the end point of this process. He is a milestone along the way.
Let's pivot now, Alex, because our second story tonight takes us to the other side of the world, where citizens are finding a very different way to make their displeasure known. And the results are nothing short of seismic.
Absolutely. Let's cross over to the United Kingdom, where something remarkable just happened. The Green Party has won a thumping victory in a parliamentary by-election, and here's the headline that should make every political strategist in Westminster sit up and pay attention. The Labour Party, which is the current party of government, came in third. Not second. Third. In what should have been a competitive seat for the governing party, voters sent an unmistakable message of rejection.
According to reporting from Middle East Eye, the Greens delivered what can only be described as a commanding performance. This wasn't a narrow upset or a squeaker that could be explained away by low turnout or local factors. This was a decisive, convincing win that represents a significant shift in the political landscape. By-elections in the UK have a long history of serving as protest votes, but the scale of this result, and specifically the collapse of the Labour vote, tells a story that goes well beyond typical mid-term dissatisfaction.
Let's talk about why this matters so much, because context is everything. The Labour Party under Keir Starmer won a massive parliamentary majority in the 2024 general election, sweeping the Conservatives out of power after 14 years. It was supposed to be a new beginning, a reset, a government that would address the cost of living crisis, rebuild public services, and restore trust in politics. And yet, less than 2 years into that government, voters in this by-election delivered a verdict that should terrify Labour strategists. Coming in third is not a warning shot. It's a full-scale rejection.
And we need to examine why. What is driving voters away from Labour and toward the Greens in such dramatic fashion? There are several factors at play, and they're interconnected. First, there is profound disillusionment with Labour's policy direction. Many voters who supported Labour in 2024 feel the government has failed to deliver on its promises. Public services remain under strain. The cost of living crisis continues to bite. And on foreign policy, particularly regarding the conflict in Gaza, Labour's position has alienated a significant portion of its base. Middle East Eye's coverage of this by-election is not coincidental. The publication has been closely tracking how the Gaza conflict has reshaped British electoral politics.
And that's a crucial point. The Green Party has been far more vocal in its criticism of Israel's military operations in Gaza and has called for stronger action, including arms embargo measures, that Labour has been reluctant to embrace fully. In constituencies with significant Muslim populations, or simply in areas where voters care deeply about international humanitarian law, that position has resonated powerfully. What we're seeing is a realignment where voters are making foreign policy a domestic electoral issue in a way that British politics hasn't seen in decades, arguably not since the Iraq War.
But it's not just Gaza, and I think it's important not to reduce this result to a single issue. The Green surge also reflects a broader hunger for a politics that is more principled, more consistent, and more willing to challenge the status quo. On climate policy, on housing, on public ownership of utilities, on workers' rights, the Greens are occupying political territory that Labour has vacated in its rush toward the centre. Voters who wanted transformative change and feel they got managerialism instead are looking for alternatives, and they're finding one.
Let's talk about what this means structurally, because a by-election is one thing, but the implications run much deeper. If the Greens can replicate this kind of performance across multiple constituencies, it fundamentally changes the arithmetic of British politics. Labour's massive parliamentary majority was built on a coalition that included progressive voters, Muslim communities, young people, and environmentally conscious citizens. If those groups are peeling away to the Greens, Labour's majority, which looks impregnable on paper, could prove far more fragile than anyone assumed.
And the party strategists know this. The panic within Labour over results like this is real, even if it's not always visible publicly. The standard response from governing parties after a bad by-election is to dismiss it as a protest vote, to say that voters will come home at the general election, to insist that midterm blues are normal. But the depth of this defeat, coming in third, not second, suggests something more fundamental. You don't come third in a by-election because of temporary frustration. You come third because voters have decided that you no longer represent their values or their interests.
Who benefits and who loses here? The Greens obviously benefit enormously. A result like this generates media attention, energizes activists, attracts donations, and proves to skeptical voters that the party can actually win. It transforms them from a protest vote into a viable electoral force. Labour loses not just a seat but something more precious, the perception of inevitability, the sense that progressive voters have nowhere else to go. That assumption has been shattered, and once it's gone, it's very hard to rebuild.
The Conservatives, interestingly, may also take some perverse comfort from Labour's humiliation, but they shouldn't. If British politics is fragmenting, if the two-party duopoly is weakening, that instability affects everyone. And for the Conservatives, still struggling with their own identity crisis after the electoral wipeout of 2024, the rise of the Greens as a serious electoral force adds another competitor to an already crowded field. British politics is getting more complicated, more fractured, and more unpredictable, and that's true for all the established parties.
There's also a deeper democratic story here, and this is where our two stories tonight start to connect. In Hong Kong, a retiree goes to prison for calling on people to boycott an election. In the United Kingdom, voters use the electoral system itself to deliver a devastating rebuke to their government. Both stories are about the same fundamental question. What recourse do citizens have when they believe their government has failed them?
That's exactly the thread that ties this all together, Alex. In a functioning democracy, the answer to that question is clear. You organize, you campaign, you vote, and if the government doesn't listen, you vote them out, or you vote for someone else who will. That's what happened in this UK by-election. Voters felt unheard, and they used the most powerful tool available to them, the ballot box, to make sure they could not be ignored. The system bent, but it didn't break. It worked as designed.
But in Hong Kong, that safety valve has been welded shut. The electoral system has been restructured to ensure that only approved candidates can run. Calling for a boycott of that system is now a criminal offense. The avenues for peaceful, legal dissent have been systematically closed off, one by one. And when you close off every legitimate channel for people to express their dissatisfaction, you don't eliminate the dissatisfaction. You just force it underground, where it festers, where it radicalizes, where it becomes harder to manage and more dangerous for everyone.
And this is the paradox that authoritarian systems never seem to learn. The more you suppress dissent, the more you guarantee that when it eventually surfaces, it will be more intense, more unpredictable, and more destabilizing than it would have been if you had simply allowed people to speak freely in the first place. A retiree posting on Facebook is not a threat to national security. A retiree posting on Facebook is the system working, is pressure being released, is a citizen engaging with his government in the most basic way possible. Criminalizing that engagement doesn't make the government stronger. It makes it more brittle.
Now let's zoom out even further, because these two stories represent different points on a global spectrum that we should all be watching. Across the world, we are seeing a tension between governments that want more control over public discourse and citizens who are demanding more accountability. From social media regulations in Europe to content moderation battles in the United States, from press freedom crackdowns in multiple countries to the rise of digital surveillance capabilities, the question of who controls the public conversation is the defining political battle of our time.
And technology is at the center of it. In Hong Kong, social media monitoring is being used to identify and prosecute dissidents. In the UK, social media played a crucial role in organizing the Green campaign and spreading its message to voters who might never have heard it through traditional media channels. The same platforms, the same technologies, being used in radically different ways depending on whether the government views citizen engagement as a right to be protected or a threat to be managed. The technology is neutral. The political systems that deploy it are not.
Let's talk about what the international community should be taking from these two stories. On Hong Kong, the response from democratic governments has been largely symbolic. Statements of concern, travel advisories, limited sanctions. But the economic infrastructure that ties Hong Kong to the global financial system remains intact. International corporations continue to operate under a legal framework that criminalizes free speech. Every bank, every law firm, every multinational that maintains a presence in Hong Kong is, by its presence, implicitly accepting a system in which a retiree can be jailed for posting his political opinions online. That complicity deserves far more scrutiny than it currently receives.
And on the UK result, the lesson for democratic governments everywhere is that legitimacy is not a permanent possession. It must be earned continuously, through responsiveness, through accountability, through genuine representation of the people's concerns. When Labour won its landslide in 2024, it had a mandate. But a mandate is not a blank check. It comes with obligations, and when those obligations are not met, voters will find alternatives. The speed with which they found the Greens in this by-election should be a wake-up call not just for Labour, but for every democratic government that takes its electorate for granted.
There's one more connection I want to draw before we wrap up, and it goes to the heart of what we do here on Truth Report. Both of these stories are fundamentally about power and accountability. In Hong Kong, power is being exercised without accountability. The government can prosecute, imprison, and silence its critics with no meaningful check on that authority. In the UK, voters just demonstrated that accountability still exists, that power can be challenged, that elections still matter. Both stories remind us that democracy is not a destination. It is a practice, a daily discipline, a choice that societies make and must keep making.
And that practice requires active participation. It requires citizens who are informed, who are engaged, who are willing to show up and be counted. It requires a free press that can report without fear. It requires courts that apply the law impartially. It requires governments that accept criticism as the price of legitimacy rather than treating it as a threat to be eliminated. When any of those elements erode, democracy erodes with them. Hong Kong shows us what happens when those elements are systematically dismantled. The UK by-election shows us what happens when they still function.
So to our viewers, whether you're watching from Hong Kong, from London, from anywhere in the world, the message tonight is this. Your voice matters. The way you use it matters. The fact that there are governments trying to silence voices like yours tells you everything you need to know about how powerful those voices are. A 68-year-old retiree with a Facebook account terrified a government backed by one of the most powerful states on earth. Think about that. Think about what that says about the power of ordinary people speaking truth.
And to the voters who showed up in that UK by-election and made their voices heard through the ballot box, you demonstrated something that people around the world are fighting and sacrificing for. The ability to hold your government accountable, peacefully and lawfully, through democratic participation. Never take that for granted. Never assume someone else will do it for you. Democracy is not a spectator sport.
That's our show for tonight. I'm Alex Truth. We've covered a lot of ground, from a Hong Kong courtroom where a retiree was sentenced for his Facebook posts, to a UK polling station where voters delivered a message their government will not be able to ignore. Two stories, one theme. The eternal struggle between power and the people it claims to serve.
I'm Maya Clarity. Thank you for watching Truth Report. As always, we encourage you to read the original reporting, including from the South China Morning Post and Middle East Eye, who covered these stories firsthand. Check the sources, verify the facts, and form your own conclusions. That's what a free press is for. That's what free citizens do. We'll see you next time.
Stay informed. Stay engaged. And never stop asking questions. Good night.